Every system that ever claimed total control eventually discovered the same truth. People adapt faster than rules. Throughout history, money has always been used as a tool of control, but it has never been used without resistance. Kings tried to control gold. Empires tried to fix prices. States tried to trap wealth inside borders. And every time, people found a way around it. Not because they were rebels, not because they were criminals, but because survival always comes before obedience. When Roman emperors debased their coins, people stopped trusting them. They hoarded older currency. They weighed coins instead of counting them. When medieval rulers imposed heavy taxes, trade didn't stop. It moved, quietly, through side routes, personal networks, and informal markets. Control existed, but it was never complete because control required visibility, and visibility created blind spots. This is the first thing modern systems try to eliminate, but historically, those blind spots were everything. During times of war, governments restricted currencies. During crises, capital controls were introduced. Money was frozen, seized, or declared invalid. On paper, these measures looked absolute. In reality, they never were. People converted value into objects, jewelry, livestock, foreign currencies, anything that could carry purchasing power outside official channels. When owning gold became illegal, people hid it. When foreign exchange was banned, people traded it privately. When banks collapsed, trust shifted to relationships. The pattern is clear. Whenever a system tightened control, people didn't fight it directly. They bypassed it. And this is the mistake most modern narratives make. They assume control works best when it is strict. In reality, strict control creates pressure, and pressure creates cracks. The tighter a system becomes, the more energy builds beneath it. History is full of examples. In the 20th century, governments around the world introduced capital controls to stabilize economies. Citizens were told where they could move money, how much they could withdraw, and what currencies they could hold. Officially, these systems were airtight. Unofficially, entire underground economies emerged. Cash moved through informal networks. Value crossed borders without crossing checkpoints. Trust replaced paperwork. And here's the key point. Most of these people didn't see themselves as resisting power. They were simply trying to live. That distinction matters, because resistance doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like adaptation. Modern systems understand this lesson very well. That's why today's control doesn't rely on bans alone. It relies on integration. Instead of outlawing alternatives, it absorbs them. Instead of blocking movement, it tracks it. Instead of threatening punishment, it introduces inconvenience. This is where the past and the present diverge. Historically, escape routes existed because systems were slow. Rules took time to enforce. Information moved imperfectly. Authority relied on reports, not real-time data. And that delay gave people space. Space to move value, space to hide intent, space to make choices without immediate consequences. Modern systems removed that delay, not because they wanted to eliminate freedom, but because speed was profitable, efficiency was demanded, automation was rewarded, and step by step, the gaps disappeared. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even now, systems are not perfect. They are just better at appearing complete. Every system that promises total visibility depends on assumptions. That data reflects reality. That behavior is consistent. That patterns don't change. But human behavior is not static. It adapts under pressure. When rules tighten, people don't stop acting. They change how they act. This is why black markets didn't disappear. They evolved. This is why informal economies still exist, even in the most regulated societies. And this is why complete financial control has never been achieved. Because money is not just a technical construct. It's social. It flows through trust, relationships, and shared understanding. And those things don't scale neatly. Modern systems try to fix this by removing the human element, by replacing trust with verification, replacing judgment with algorithms, replacing discretion with thresholds. But in doing so, they create a new vulnerability. They assume people will behave consistently. They assume incentives will always work. They assume compliance is permanent. History suggests otherwise. Every system that believed it had solved control eventually encountered something it couldn't predict. Not an enemy, not a revolution, but everyday people doing ordinary things in unexpected ways. This is why the idea of escape has always existed alongside money. Not as a grand act of defiance, but as a quiet adjustment. People didn't ask, how do we overthrow the system? They asked, how do we live within it without losing everything? That question shaped centuries of behavior, and it still does. The difference today is not that escape has disappeared. It's that escape looks different. It's no longer physical. It's no longer obvious. And it's no longer discussed openly. Because modern control doesn't fear rebellion, it fears unpredictability. And unpredictability is harder to eliminate than opposition. This is why history matters here. Not to romanticize the past, but to understand a pattern. Control expands. People adapt. Systems respond over and over again. The idea that we are living in a completely new era of control is only partially true. The tools are new. The behavior is not. What is new is how much of that behavior happens inside the system itself. That's the real shift, and that's where the next part begins. What made escape possible in the past was not courage. It was distance. Distance between authority and daily life. Distance between rules and enforcement. Distance between money and identity. That distance no longer exists. In earlier systems, money was separate from who you were. You could lose currency without losing access to society. You could move value without leaving a trail behind you. Today, money is no longer just a tool. It is a layer of identity. Accounts are tied to names. Names are tied to documents. Documents are tied to systems. And systems talk to each other. This is the fundamental change. Modern control is not stronger because it is harsher. It is stronger because it is connected. Finance is linked to identity. Identity is linked to access. Access is linked to participation. And participation is assumed. You are expected to be inside the system at all times. Not because someone forces you, but because life outside it feels increasingly impractical. This is why escape today feels abstract. In the past, escape meant movement, leaving, hiding, crossing borders. Now escape feels psychological. It's not about where you go, but how visible you are. Not about resistance, but about exposure. And this creates a new kind of pressure. People are no longer afraid of punishment. They are afraid of exclusion, being locked out, flagged, delayed. Because exclusion doesn't look violent, it looks administrative. And administration is harder to fight than force. This is where modern systems gain their advantage. They don't need to chase people. They don't need to threaten them. They simply make participation conditional. As long as you fit, everything works. When you don't, things slow down. Not forever, not dramatically, just enough to encourage adjustment. This is why escape today is not about breaking rules. It's about avoiding attention, staying within acceptable ranges, avoiding extremes, blending into patterns. And that changes behavior at a deep level. People don't ask, what is allowed? They ask, what will trigger the system? That question alone shows how power has shifted. Control no longer sits outside the individual. It lives inside decision-making. And the more integrated systems become, the harder it is to step back. Not because escape is impossible, but because escape now requires awareness. And awareness is uncomfortable. Because once you see the system clearly, you can't unsee it. This is why modern escape is rarely discussed openly. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it challenges the idea of normal life. And normal life is what systems depend on. This is where many people misunderstand the idea of escape. Escape does not mean abandoning society. It does not mean rejecting technology. And it does not mean living outside all systems. That version of escape is unrealistic. And unrealistic ideas are easy to dismiss. Real escape has always been quieter than that. Historically, escape meant optionality, having more than one way to store value, more than one way to transact, more than one way to participate. It was never about leaving the system entirely. It was about not being fully dependent on a single path. That principle has not changed. What has changed is how dependency is created. Modern systems are designed to feel complete. Everything you need is inside. Everything you want is optimized. And when a system feels complete, people stop looking for alternatives. Not because alternatives don't exist, but because searching feels unnecessary. This is the most powerful form of control. Not force, not fear, comfort. Comfort keeps people inside boundaries they would otherwise question. And questioning is dangerous to systems, because once people question structure, they start noticing fragility. No system is truly stable. The more centralized it becomes, the more vulnerable it is to disruption. History proves this again and again. Empires collapse not because people resist, but because systems overextend. They become efficient, but brittle. Modern money is approaching that point, not because it is failing, but because it is everywhere. And when something touches everything, any flaw becomes systemic. This is why the idea of escape is returning, not as rebellion, but as curiosity. People are beginning to ask quiet questions. What happens if access is removed? What happens if rules change overnight? What happens if participation is no longer voluntary? These questions don't come from paranoia. They come from observation. And observation is the beginning of awareness. Escape, in the modern sense, starts there. Not in action, but in understanding. Understanding how dependency is built. Understanding where options still exist. Understanding that freedom is not absolute, but negotiable. This is not a call to leave the system. It's a reminder not to disappear into it. Because the most effective control is not the one that traps you. It's the one you stop noticing. And once control becomes invisible, only awareness creates distance. That distance is small, but it matters. Because systems don't need rebellion to fail. They only need people who stop behaving predictably.